changing conditions often call us into new versions of ourselves, into better versions of ourselves. And all of these legends here have heeded the call to devote their lives and their livelihoods to addressing climate change or environmental issues in some way. And so I'd love to jump right in and hear from you each about what turned you in your own particular solutions-based work from idea to action. Was there an inciting incident that made the change for you? Take us there, take us into your solution and what got you there. And please introduce yourself. Please name, organization, and tell us about your work, please.
I'll go first, I guess. My name's Damien Cole. I'm the National Campaign Director for Surfrider Foundation and also co-founder for a new wooden sustainable surfboard company called Varuna that we just launched a few months ago. So I guess my moment, I actually started off as an environmentalist when I was really young. My dad has always been a really environmentally focused person. He actually helped start with Tom Curran, Surfrider Foundation Europe. And that was back in the very, very early 90s. So I grew up with a real sense of knowing that we are so fortunate to have the ocean here and that we need to look after it, because if we don't, shit happens. So I grew up with that sentiment and that narrative in my head. Fast forward to my early 20s, as a lot of you I'm sure would probably know as well, in your 20s, you're a pretty selfish person, let's be honest. It tends to be a lot about kind of you and what you're doing, and you want to travel and you want to do things. So I ended up living in Western Australia and I got offered a job in the mines. So through most of my 20s, I grew up, I kind of was working in the mines, ended up working in the offshore industry as well, predominantly in gas. But also aluminium and coal as well, a little bit, and a few other things. And it wasn't until probably, and that was really, going back to the reason I probably did that was the money was good. And as a 21, 22, 23-year-old, it was, if you're getting thrown $3,000 at you a week, you're not going to say no, because it's just easy money. But I think the other reason was probably, even though I knew that our environment needed to be protected, there was probably a sense of helplessness and a sense that, who am I? I'm just one person. How would I ever make change? How could I ever affect change? I may as well take the money, because if I don't, then they'll just replace it with someone and someone else will get it. So that was kind of most of my 20s. And then I got to my late 20s and I was working offshore, and this is it's crazy to think now that I was earning the most money that I'd ever earned in my life, and probably more than most people around the world would ever earn. I was earning up to about $1,500 a day, working just shitty jobs out offshore. But I realized that even the money was there and it was flowing in, I felt myself getting more and more depressed and more it was really, really affecting my soul. And I just realized that I wasn't meant to be here, and I realized, and I really did. I kept talking to myself and going like, Damo, stop bullshitting yourself, telling yourself you're just one little person who can't make change. You can't keep facilitating and being part of this cog that is destroying the planet. So I got to the age of 28 or 29 and I actually quit my job, and I told all my workers, they were like, where are you going to go? What are you going to do? And I was like, I'm going to go to Victoria and study environmental science. Not knowing what environmental science was, which is quite an embarrassing thing to say now. But at the time, I was like, I just knew that it was something that I had to do. So from there, fast forward, I joined Surfrider Foundation. We had the fight for the bite. We organised all these paddle outs and we won. And it was just this really empowering thing where I realised it was no big corporation. We had no money. I threw all the money I had in, some of it was blood money for sure from the mines, not going to lie. But I was like, I'll get them back on this. So we fought our asses off and we won that. And it was from that sense of community and that sense of coming together, not from a lot of money, not from a huge corporation, but from community groups and from individuals like yourselves who came down and just said enough is enough. and drew a line in the sand and said, we cannot keep doing this. And as I say, we won, and it was such an amazing thing. And then the only negative that I had from that was people kept coming up to me saying, you're a hypocrite. You're a hypocrite because you're looking to stop an oil company from drilling, but your surfboards are made out of oil. You drove down to the beach and you used petrol. And what gives you the right to stand up and stop an oil company drilling in Australian waters if you're part of the problem? Which is completely beside the point of asking and really demanding a better future. Because I can tell you now, every single one of you here, and myself included and everyone on this panel, is a victim of our entire society. And I don't mean that in a let's all be victims and sit down and cry, and it means that we were born into this society, and we only have two choices. We either continue on or we step up and we try and make change and make that positive change. So from there, I thought, well, you know what? They're not wrong. Why is it that the surfboard industry has lagged so much when every one of us as surfers feels so connected to our ocean and our planet, and we know it. We've all sat out there before, and whether it's dolphins coming through waves, a beautiful sunrise or sunset, we sit there and it feels magical. But our surfboard industry and our surfing industry as a whole is a toxic industry. And we thought, well, we can change this. So we changed the paradigm and we went, well, our mission here, and we need to change our surfboards and our way of manufacturing surfboards. So we decided to do something about it. And with a small group of us, we decided to create Varuna, which is a sustainable surfboard company. We don't use foam at all. They're hollow wooden surfboards. And we recreate your favorite shapers' designs in a much more sustainable way. And as we've just launched, we've gotten a lot of interest, and it's been an incredible journey so far.
We'll come back to that. Thank you, Dama.
Hi, I'm Charlotte Connell. I'm also a mum, but a weekend away from the kids. Woohoo! And I work for a climate salad. It's a climate tech community, so I help connect founders, entrepreneurs with investment customers, mentors and advisors to help them scale their impact. And I've worked in the sustainability space for a while, and I was thinking, Lauren, about your question, and I'll tell a little story about the person who inspires me, and that's my grandmother. So in 1937, at ALP branch meetings, women weren't allowed to vote on issues at those branch meetings. And I think about myself as a 16-year-old, and I would have been quite disillusioned by that and thought, you know what, screw you, ALP, I'm going to do my own party or my own thing. I'm not going to be part of politics. But my grandma joined the ALP so that she could be part of changing that, so that women could start to vote at branch meetings. And in 1974, she became Australia's first female Lord Mayor, a housewife, mum of 4 in her 50s. And she did that because she wanted to protect her local environment. So, I grew up with really strong female leaders who, if the path in front of them wasn't there, it didn't matter because they would create it themselves. And I think about that with the previous panel. It's like you leaning into those difficult and uncomfortable situations so that you can change from within. And, I thought, I'm going to change the world for the better. And went and volunteered on a ridiculously remote island in Vanuatu for a year and thought I could, I even packed a surfboard. There was no surf, but I'm like, I'm going to find the surf and I'm going to form an eco-surf tourism resort. No, it stayed in its bag, and I learned a language, and I probably had hardly any impact on the beautiful people there, but they had a huge impact on me. And I realised that you can actually have an incredible impact from your desk at home, from what you do, from the skills you have, and the workplace that you're currently in.
Thank you, Charlotte. That was beautiful.
Firstly, thank you guys for having me on stage. My name is Tom Stapleton. I'm one of the co-founders of Make Your Mark Super. And if you haven't heard of us, we are a new sustainable super fund that invests for the community and the planet. And we're looking to change the way we all interact with super. And we like to say by bringing it to life. And what I mean by that is we're going to be showing our members exactly where their money is going, but also explaining the rationale as to why. And the best thing about what we're doing is we're trying to show the actual impact that your money is having through your superannuation, which is a really exciting space to be in, because this has never really been done before in the superannuation, I guess, space. And I guess the reason why we created Make Your Mark, I can kind of bring it back to my personal journey. I was a scuba diver in a past life, and I guess transitioned over to surfing, and obviously have a love for the ocean and the environment. And obviously, went through life as you do, trying to find your purpose and how you can create impact. And it's bloody hard to do. You leave university and you're like, well, what do I do next? And you can find yourself in banking or a corporate job. And for me, I found myself in financial planning of all places. And that's where really, I guess, Make Your Mark Super began, because 3.5 years ago, we were looking at sustainable investing and what it actually looked like in the market and what superannuations were doing. And we were shocked by what we saw. We were seeing sustainable super funds, or ethical or responsible or eco or green. When we looked under the hood and where that money was actually going, it was still going to the fossil fuel industry. It was still going to the big four banks, and it was still going to tobacco companies. And that, I guess, lit a fire in our belly. And we just said, why can't superannuation, be transparent and actually say, be sustainable? And if you say you're going to be sustainable, then actually, practice what you preach. And I guess alongside that is this narrative behind superannuation and the member being this set and forget product where we have it when we're 18 and, our bosses give it to us and we don't see it until we're 67 years old. And we thought, why can't super be, this thing that we love and we're proud of? And there is so much potential impact that can be created by super that sits outside of growing retirement savings. And I guess that's led us down this track of, create Make Your Mark Super, and here we are today.
Yeah, hi guys, thanks for having me. I'm Dean Ipovitz. I'm a local builder. I've got a building company by the name of Verticon, who's based around the corner and also down in Rose Bay in Sydney. We started 6 years ago. I was working on a site in Surrey Hills in Sydney as a project manager, and I just was trying to wrap my head. I've always been someone who's been really connected to the environment. I grew up on the Mornington Peninsula. I've always been around the water. I've always been going forward driving, and it was just something that, I guess through my dad as well, it sort of connected me to the environment. 25 odd years later, I wound up in the construction industry, didn't go to university, didn't know what I wanted to do, and did a carpentry apprenticeship, but always knew I was connected to the environment in some way. Was working on a big site as a project manager. I'd upskilled my way off the tools and was just looking at this waste stream that we were creating and how disconnected everyone was from what we were actually doing. It was just money in, money out, trying to make as much as you possibly can. And I had a mate at the time who was working for me as a carpenter. And I just said to him, he was also a surfer, grew up in Dunsborough on the other side of the country to me. I grew up in a place called Dramana. And we'd sort of both very similar upbringings, and we said, why don't we go out and try and start our own thing and try and see if we can do things a little bit differently and do things a little bit better. And so lo and behold, I left my really well-paying job, went back on the tools after nearly 10 years off the tools, and we created Verticon. And one of the first things we did was let my people go surfing. And it had such a profound effect on me personally and the way that we wanted to run and shape the business. And so ultimately off the back of that journey, we created a company that is now the first B Corp first construction company that's in Australia, the first B Corp certified climate active carbon neutral construction company. And we knew we just wanted to do something different. We didn't know how we were going to do it, but we read that book and just knew that we had to take ownership of the damage we were doing, because ultimately we recognised that no matter how hard we tried, our well-being and our livelihood was going to have a far greater negative impact on the environment than it would ever give back. And so we thought, let's try and change the narrative and let's do our best to do that. So I can go into that in a bit more detail later on, but that's how I ended up here.
So good, Dean. Really inspired to hear your story. So I'm Tim Silverwood. I spent a lot of years building and leading Take 3 for the Sea, having just been exposed to the problem firsthand, as we all did in those early days, and thought, well, there's definitely something I can do about it. And it was Lauren's beautiful soul collaborator in life that helped inspire me back in the day, Rasta. And building and leading Take 3 for the Sea was phenomenal, and I just did so much of this grassroots activism, going around and trying to awaken people's awareness to a problem and inspire them to do something small to respond to it. And that was just a wild ride, but I sort of got to about that 2018 time, so that was that 9-10 year itch coming up, and actually went away to a retreat with Anna Rose and Claire Herschel. Actually, the guys that co-founded Surface of Climate, Bindi and Johnny, also went to the same kind of climate retreat. And it was really designed, you've got Tim Flannery there and Ove Holgerberg and all these incredible, influential people just to really hammer home the state of affairs of things. And I left that going, you know what, like Take 3 was great, but we need to do more. And to do more, we need to shift giant amounts of capital and influence into these new solutions that are regenerative and just absolutely transformative. And so essentially what I do now, and I have been for the last couple of years, if you didn't get the memo, is building Ocean Impact Organisation. I'm now based up here, as is my co-founder Nick Shirelli. He's at Ocean Shores, and we're Australia's first startup accelerator and investment vehicle dedicated to building businesses that can transform ocean health. So if you think about how we can improve aquaculture, how we can improve shipping, how we can prevent pollution, how we can build new materials, how we can promote the circular economy, all these businesses and solutions are out there. They need to reach scale and overtake the archaic and antiquated industries that before them. And so we are doing that. That's essentially what we're doing.
Hey, I'm Henry. Thanks, Lauren. Thanks, Josh. And I'm actually here. My job here is to channel a 76-year-old Swedish woman called Helena Norberg Hodge. I work for Local Futures, and Helena is the founder of Local Futures. And we're focused on looking at how we can systemically change our economic system. So we're looking at localization as a systemic way forward, because climate is not, as much as technologically based or financial based solutions can be an important tool, we actually have to look at scaling down our economies, shortening supply chains, rebuilding economies that are connected to nature, that are community based. We all know this intuitively, but we haven't been made aware of the fact that there is a movement and an economic trajectory for doing so. So I'm here to discuss economic localization, the work of Local Futures, as a kind of broader framework for rebuilding economies that are not only more sustainable, but also better for human well-being, for prosperity. And as the last panel so clearly talked about, based on that fabric that makes us who we are, makes us human, the fabric of connection to each other in our local communities. So that's broadly what I'm going to be sharing on. Thank you for having me.
Henry, sorry, I have a follow-up question. Actually, I have many, but I'll just ask one. As a young person, how did you find yourself engaging with such intricate work already?
Just quickly, I'm a bird watcher. I'm a bird nerd, actually. So I love, yeah. My sister's a surfer. I'm not a surfer. I was too scared to go out with all the macho boys, so I stayed
Me
at home and I got my binoculars. I looked at birds, and I realized that the natural world. Well, I mean, as a kid, I was pretty, species are becoming extinct. We all know the story, and I had the idea in my head that this was a trade-off, that we could either have human well-being or ecological well-being. And when I saw Local Futures documentary, Economics of Happiness, the piece of the puzzle clicked into place that actually the same system that is destroying the planet is creating wealth inequality, is making the average person, even the upper middle classes now, having to run harder and faster just to stay in place. So we now have an opportunity to build a movement that connects economic and ecological concerns, that talks about how we can have a future where people are flourishing and nature is flourishing, because it's about scaling down this corporate global economy and rebuilding stronger local economies, and that's good for people and the planet. So when that piece clicked into place for me, I was like, oh, I can get out of my depression slump and start working towards this. So I, followed that trajectory. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Henry.
Hey, my name's Sam Elsom and I'm the CEO and co-founder of a company called Sea Forest. We're based down in Tasmania and we're building what we like to think is a new and environmentally positive seaweed-based aquaculture industry. So my journey to this, my background is actually in the rad trade, so a very long way away from growing seaweed, but I was inspired by climate conversations just like we're having right now. Understanding through the Climate Council and listening to Professor Tim Flannery talk about the state of the planet and the urgent need for action, and it was really just, like, we're fucked. We're in a lot of trouble, and there's a huge amount of work to do in a very short amount of time. And it was through, listening to that, hearing that, being a parent, being someone who deeply cares about the environment, that I began to research possible solutions. And it was actually through Tim that we learned about seaweed as one of those. And when I looked around, particularly in Australia, to find that there wasn't really a lot of activity happening. Through the research, we've learned that we're actually one of the most biodiverse places on the planet here in Australia for seaweed, yet we don't have a seaweed aquaculture industry, and that was largely because most of the seaweeds that are grown and that we see in our Japanese restaurants and the like are Northern Hemisphere endemic. So we're not allowed to grow seaweeds that are not native in Australia. And so it was about finding a solution or a seaweed that we could grow quickly and that would have an addressable market. And it was through this research that I then learned about work that was happening at the CSIRO up in Townsville, where they were feeding 30 different varieties of seaweed to livestock to see the impact that might have on methane emissions. Now, at that time, MLA, which is Australia's kind of Meat and Livestock Australia, which is the industry body, I guess, they'd set a 2030 carbon neutral target, and they had no roadmap. No way of getting there. They just set this target and realising that methane emissions have 28 times the warming impact on our atmosphere of regular CO2. And they were throwing lots of money at potential solutions. And the CSIRO got involved in that research, and they found that one seaweed that happens to be native to our shores could virtually eliminate methane emissions when fed at a very small dietary inclusions. So this is not work that I was involved in. It was from the CSIRO. But the whole issue at the time, this tiny seaweed called Asparagopsis, you only have to feed 0.2% of the animal's diet to have this impact. It's absolutely remarkable. But the problem was that no one knew how to grow it, and there was no commercial supply. So here's this amazing science and no real supply, no way of creating the impact. And so that became our challenge at Sea Forest, and the reason why we're now down in Tasmania, where the seaweed is annually abundant and where we have a team of 10 or 12 scientists. We have 5 universities that we're working with. Seaweed is, as I found out, naively going into this, but later finding out that seaweed is a very complex science. They have unique life histories where seaweeds reproduce in crazy ways and have different life phases and all sorts of things that we've learned. But we have a remarkable team that are completely dedicated to the cause, and we've made a huge amount of progress. So now we've developed methods for being able to farm this seaweed, and both on land and at sea. We've got now secured one of the largest marine leases in the Southern Hemisphere. It's a huge 1,800 hectare lease on the southeast coast of Tasmania and completely dedicated to seaweed. We've also just recently purchased a land-based site where there's 660 ponds where we'll be able to scale the supply. So now we're working with farmers and we're having impact, and it's been a really rewarding journey. But, you know, I just feel like being here tonight is about, you know, having these conversations and then feeling moved enough to take action. And I think that's what it's all about at the end of the day. We're all on this planet together, and we all have to do what we can to try and create the world that we want for our children and grandchildren. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam. Here's a pop quiz for you all. Does anyone have a sense for how much money is circulating in the Australian superannuation fund? Any guesses? How much money is it?
Do you know, mate?
Over 3 trillion. Just over.
3.5 trillion as of the end of last year. Tom, I wanted to come back to you. Many of us know that government subsidies to the oil and gas industry are happening. Many of us oppose them. But if you have a superannuation fund and you haven't very specifically divested from these industries, your money is probably funding those industries as well, including funding nuclear weapons. There are billions of dollars of Australian super fund money going into nuclear weapons, which is just not healthy for anyone or the planet. I am embarrassed to say that I do not have a superannuation fund yet. Tom, can you give me a little bit of advice about what it takes to set up a super if people are like me and they don't have one yet, or how much time it might take to switch over if people are looking for a better...
I'll go with the latter, because technically I can't give you personal advice on how to set it up, but maybe that's a trick question. I'll talk about, I guess, you know, you're here tonight about how powerful superannuation is when it comes to climate action, and to really kind of give you context about what that means is you have to think about your super, where your employer pays contributions to because you have a job, right? Where does that money go? And it goes to the super fund, and that investment manager, he invests your money on your behalf, and it can be in industries that are fantastic for the planet, like renewable energy or education or innovation. But unfortunately, you know, it's so common to see that money is actually invested in industries that wreck the planet, like the fossil fuel industry, like tobacco, like nuclear, like weapons. And unfortunately, if you have never made a choice on your super, it's likely that you could still be invested in those harmful industries. But I guess the empowering story here is everyone in this room has a choice on their super, and by making a choice, all it means is you switch your super away from, I guess, you know, the default option that you had when you were 18, and it can literally take 2 to 3 minutes and be the single largest contribution you make to the planet.
Thank you. It was so great to hear from Ella earlier. One of the things that I noticed as a blow-in, as an Ausmerican, is the incredible great fortune we all have as Australians to have this long legacy of Indigenous wisdom to choose to learn from. The Bundjalung people who took care of this place have been here for tens of thousands of years, and they worked out how to not wreck it. We would be wise to continue to consult with them about the choices they're continuing to make to live lightly upon the land and waters here. They are choices, or choices we all can make. And I wanted to chat with you, Charlotte, about diversity and inclusion, and how diversity and inclusion are shaping the future of the tech space.
Absolutely. So I work in that climate tech space, and in the startup ecosystem, investment is flowing into climate tech 5 times faster than any other startup sector. But within all the climate tech companies out there, and they did a mapping across the globe, only 9.5% of them are founded by women. So, you know, what we do in the ecosystem in the startup space shapes tomorrow's future. Oh, shapes tomorrow's future, well, shapes our economy of tomorrow. It creates jobs, and there just isn't enough women globally. But in the community that I work with across Australia and New Zealand, 45% of our founders are women. So, these are leaders that are leading right now, but they're also helping to create jobs and opportunities for more women to come on board. Now, why that's important? We know that climate change affects minorities and women more. We know that. It adversely affects us more. So, and I'm nothing against men on this wonderful panel, who are incredible solution creators here. But it's important that we create an environment that women and minority groups can participate in, because, just within the community of climate tech companies, we're going to create 5,000 new jobs that weren't there yesterday. So we need to make sure that our leaders are diverse and are inclusive. And it's not just because we don't want to leave anyone behind, but they also outperform businesses that don't have diversity and inclusion across their executive leadership team. And we see study after study that proves that. So it's about not leaving anyone behind, but it's also a really great opportunity to have a pretty badass performing team.
We know that diversity defines any healthy and thriving ecosystem. Tim, I wanted to jump over to you. You also work in this emerging technologies startup space. How is diversity, and you can interpret that any way you like to, from species to cultural and beyond, how is diversity informing the work that you're seeing come through?
Yeah, thanks, Lauren. Yeah, probably very similar to what Charlotte sort of spoke to there. We are seeing incredibly inspiring solutions out there being generated across the gender spectrum. But also I think there's just this diversity in locations and geographies, and I think that's a really amazing one. One thing with Ocean Impact Organisation is we sort of wanted to be agnostic to the industry that they're working on, the solution that they're working on. As long as the problem that they're trying to address can be correlated back to the overall health of the ocean, then we're open to suggestions. And so we've been running these campaigns for a couple of years now called the Ocean Impact Pitch Fest. And it's basically like, hey, if you've got an idea or you're working on a solution that that you think is going to make a big difference and the world is going to think is inspiring, then send us your application, show us what you got, and we'll sing it from the rooftops. And it's just remarkable to see the kinds of solutions out there that have been inspired by all manner of relationships and associations. And obviously, Sam and Sea Forest won Pitch Fest last year, and Sam's story is his own little unique one. And there's just a million billion of these taking place. And I just really hope that we in all these different sectors and industries can just keep fostering that sense of it's out there, and if you've got a solution that can be transformative, then let's take away every possible hurdle and barrier in front of you, because we've been putting up those hurdles and barriers for far too long. Let's break them down. And so I'm just having a really fun time opening up the tap and just seeing what fizzes out. It's bloody awesome. Very beer pun there. Yeah.
Food is one of the most accessible entry points for people to get involved with climate action. Henry and Sam, I'd love to hear your reflections on why people should be thinking about where their food is grown, asking questions about how it's grown. Yeah, Henry, I was thinking that would be a cool entry point to talk about local futures, because food really is such a tangible example of the work that you all do.
Yeah, well, definitely. I mean, that's why actually the climate conversation goes well beyond fossil fuels, because the global food system is responsible for about 50% of all greenhouse gas emissions, and that includes the deforestation, the changing in land use, the use of fossil fuel-based fertilizers on the land, the transport across long distances. All of this is integral to the global food system. So when you are growing food for an export market, you're growing vast monocultures of the same product. This is like fundamental ecological economics, that if you transform that, if you're growing for a local market, you're growing diversity. You're growing, a local market needs carrots and tomatoes, and it doesn't matter if the tomatoes are different colors, and it needs a bit of basil, and needs some animal products. So you're creating the market conditions that promote diversity on the land, which is actually what regenerative agriculture is based on, to really rebuild soils, to rebuild soil carbon, to suck that carbon out of the atmosphere, to provide habitat for wildlife, to restore watersheds. You need diversity on the land. So that means you need local markets over global markets. So we need to, and it also goes beyond consumer-based solutions. It's not just about buying local when you can. Obviously that's great, but we have an economic system that is making food from the other side of the world artificially cheap. So every price tag you see in the supermarket is the product of political decisions that have been made for global corporate profiteering. Subsidies have been given to support large-scale agriculture for export, continued in Australia and around the world. Regulations have been written to favor large-scale over small-scale, to restrict what we actually need to, not deliberately to restrict, but with the idea that growth is only achievable through GDP, through global trade. So reversing that economic mindset and shifting economic policy to favor small-scale, diversified, local, over large-scale and corporate is like the solution to climate change. It's like so fucking central. Sorry.
Sorry to interrupt. I just got word that we have 5 minutes remaining. I've done a horrible job at time management here. I'm sorry for that. I really want to hear from Dean and Damo and Sam still. If you could jump in succinctly, that would be fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, I guess just to keep mine really quick, but essentially the livestock sector, so our seaweed in particular works on ruminants, so animals with 4 stomachs, and those animals, predominantly cows, sheep, but cows in particular and beef are responsible for about 70% of agricultural emissions in our country. So a huge amount, because enteric methane is just so potent in our atmosphere. So whether we decide to eat red meat or not, we still have an industry that employs a lot of people, that has a huge number of animals, and so we do need a solution by 2030. And so the seaweed that we grow is trying to combat that problem by scaling and being able to produce more. But I think just one other thing I'd like to say is that the fact that we are such a country that's so biodiverse in seaweed species, we're really excited about being able to bring solutions that alternative, I guess, proteins and edible seaweeds to market, that we may be able to use our oceans to create nutrition. And I think we grow about 8 different varieties of native seaweed, many of which have never been cultivated before, and we're working with some chefs, so that's really exciting to me as well.
Thanks, Sam. I'd love... Sorry, Damo and Dean. I feel like I really wanted to get in depth. Can you quickly speak to?
I can't do it.
I'm just going to go
I'm
for
talking,
it.
I'm not going to go quickly.
I'm going to challenge you here. Can you please speak to the challenges that you've had in being in industries that have very resource-intensive ways of doing things? What has it been like breaking down those paradigms in 2 sentences or less?
Yeah, that's going to be hard. I think maybe I'll touch on the B Corp journey for us in that it's opened up the supply chains. Or it made us investigate our supply chains. I don't know if I'm going off topic here a bit, but one thing it has done is made us realise how incredibly backwards our industry is, because we're one of the biggest contributors to emissions around the world, yet we'll do something as silly as growing this monoculture of pine in Australia that we then harvest and send over to China and then ship our pine in that we build with, which is all chemically treated and can't be recycled from the eastern bloc of Europe. And
so dumb.
Yeah, but yet it's happening. I think we're in this industry that people are so disconnected from that, and it ties into food, it ties into the construction of our homes. We don't build smart homes, we build homes that are cheap, and there's an example of that's happening over the road with the Metricon shit show that was about to happen across there. Not including local builders to have a crack at trying to do something right there, where, as a construction-only company, I'm really hamstrung by what I can do, but I can try and educate my clients around renewables. We've removed the margin on renewables to try and encourage people to pick those up. We track all of our freight, all of our waste, and we offset the emissions associated with that. We're doing everything we can to try and write a blueprint for other builders and carpenters and trades to follow, and we're trying to share that, and that's part of our journey.
Two sentences, Dama.
2 sentences, shit. Can they be really long sentences? I'll just keep talking and just won't put a full stop anyway. No, yeah, listen, looking around, as I said, with the surfboard industry, we're all connected as surfers, to the ocean, to our planet. And unfortunately, our industry is a very toxic one. And you can kind of say that when you look around the world, a lot of the industries that we have had over the last kind of century has had the same thing. We've kind of, and you've got to give credit to those people over the last century. The only reason that we're able to sit here right now is because of all these change makers throughout history, whether it be politically, whether it be for gender, whether it be culturally, whether it be environmentally. And it's always going to be hard at the very start. I'm sure when the first person who made a digital camera and they were looking at Kodak, crying out, going like, nah, Kodak, it's always going to be hard to overtake an industry. But when you look at all the change makers here tonight, it's always going to be a challenge. But you look at where we can be, and I think that for me is something that inspires me every single day, is to look at not where we are today and not where people will all constantly give you shit about something that you're doing wrong and how it can't be done because of X, Y, and Z. But the key to me is always to surround yourself with people who are like-minded in the way of, inspiring people where we can actually work with each other and actually work off each other to be able to create that positive change. And that's something that we're constantly seeing now. And again, being sitting here on this panel with all these amazing people, starting up Varuna was something that just for us had to be done. And it wasn't a matter of we're going to change one material or change one little aspect of our surfboards. We completely reverse engineered surfboards, and it's been a tough, try starting up a company in the middle of a global pandemic from 3 continents over Zoom with surfboards in the cameras, trying to tell someone that the rail line isn't right. Like it hasn't been easy trying to tell the crew over in Indo that, but what we've done is we're so dedicated and so passionate about having a planet-first mindset in every single step of the way that we do, not just the materials that we use, but how we go about our everyday use. And if there's something there that we're not happy with, we look at how we can reduce our impact, because every single one of us here as not only a member of this community, not only whether it be an Australian or somebody living here, but also just as a member of this planet, you have a responsibility as if you're taking a breath of air right now, you have a responsibility to do your very best in every single action that you take.
Thank you, Dama. I can't help myself being up here with all of you amazing, amazing human beings. Can you give us, if you could encourage each person in this room to adapt, to engage with one solution this week in 5 words or less, what would that be? Anybody?
Change your super.
I'd add to that, just say, vote with your money every single day.
Yeah, and I'll just say vote for the planet.
I'd say try and make visible all of these initiatives that are so inspiring, that are coming from the bottom up, because we don't hear about them in the mainstream media, by engaging with the worldwide localization movement, worldlocalizationday.org.
I'd say we spoke about it last night with Dave and Tim. Just do something. Honestly, none of you are perfect. I'm not perfect. But do not be frozen by your imperfections. Go out and do something, whether it is voting, whether it's starting companies, whether it's joining organisations. Just get out there and help, because this is not. You can't stand on the sidelines here. You've got to get involved in the game and help us save this planet, because this isn't a drill. This is our lives we depend on. So get involved and come and join us.
Charlotte and Sam.
And I would say, and I get this, like, I want to quit my job and I want to join a movement, or I want to, work in sustainability. Stay where you are and make your workplace sustainable. Use your sphere of influence and change from within.
Yeah, and I'm with Damo. Just do what you can. We've got a lot of work to do, and everyone's just got to step up and get involved in some way they can.
Thank you. Thanks for your time and energy, everyone. Have a great night.
Thanks, everyone.